before I go any further, there is a part of me that believes that what happened specifically to George Floyd was racist. I genuinely believe that it is possible that he was discriminated against for his skin color. Now, I could be wrong, but after doing some further in-depth analysis and research, I'm finding it difficult to see how what had happened to him wasn't racist. Even from a conservative viewpoint, I'm not sure if I can just say that what happened to George Floyd specifically was another cry wolf incident.
But Steve's period. Aren't you aware that he committed all these crimes in the past, which include raiding a pregnant woman's home and putting a gun to her belly, and then only getting charged with aggravated assault?
No, man. I've been living under a rock for the past month. Please, tell me again, what did George Floyd do again? You can still believe that George Floyd was quite a character with a questionable past, and still call out his murderous death at the hands of police brutality. His past had nothing to do with the fact that 3 officers were piled on top of him while he was handcuffed. Unlike some people, I do my best to avoid double standards. If anything, it may be possible that the murder was premeditated, but we'll save that for another time. Now, to start off our deductive reasoning, we have to ask ourselves how the police arrived at the scene. The police arrived at the scene because a business had reported that George Floyd was allegedly using a counterfeit $20 bill or was suspected of doing so. Another thing we need to ask ourselves is, how did we get from George Floyd sitting up against the wall handcuffed to George Floyd being escorted across the street to be pinned down against the pavement by not 1 officer but 3 officers? More importantly, how were these specific officers trained? The majority of law enforcement academies publicly condemn using excessive force to a subject that is handcuffed. The more we begin to dive into this, the more questions begin to arise. When browsing through Facebook, I came across a very powerful message from the mayor of Atlanta before she decided to convict an officer for rightfully defending himself against Rayshard Brooks. She and I hold different perspectives, but regardless of your perspective, you can't deny that she's right.
Above everything else, I am a mother. I am a mother to 4 black children in America, one of whom is 18 years old. And when I saw the murder of George Floyd, I hurt like a mother would hurt. And on yesterday, when I heard there were rumors about violent protests in Atlanta, I did what a mother would do. I called my son and I said, "Where are you?" I said, "I cannot protect you, and black boys shouldn't be out today. So you're not going to out-concern me and out-care about where we are in America. I wear this each and every day, and I pray over my children each and every day. So what I see happening on the streets of Atlanta is not Atlanta. This is not a protest. This is not in the spirit of Martin Luther King Jr. This is chaos. A protest has purpose. When Dr. King was assassinated, we didn't do this to our city. So if you love this city that has had a legacy of black mayors and black police chiefs and people who care about this city, where more than 50% of the business owners in Metro Atlanta are minority business owners. If you care about this city, then go home and pray that somebody like Reverend Beasley will come and talk to you and give you some instructions on what a protest should look like and how you effectuate change in America. This police chief made a video on yesterday, pull it up on YouTube, where she said she was appalled to watch the murder of George Floyd. This woman did that. You're not honoring the legacy of Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement. You're not protesting anything, running out with brown liquor in your hands, breaking windows in this city. T.I. and Killer Mike own half the West Side. So when you burn down this city, you're burning down our community. If you want change in America, go and register to vote. Show up at the polls on June 9th. Do it in November. That is the change we need in this country. You are disgracing our city. You are disgracing the life of George Floyd and every other person who has been killed in this country. We are better than this. We're better than this as a city. We are better than this as a country. Go home. Go home. In the same way I couldn't protect my son on yesterday, I cannot protect you out in those streets. You're throwing knives at our police officers. You are burning cars. You have defaced the CNN building. Ted Turner started CNN in Atlanta 40 years ago because he believed in who we are as a city. There was a black reporter who was arrested on camera this morning who works for CNN. They are telling our stories, and you are disgracing their building. This is not the legacy of civil rights in America. This is chaos, and we're buying into it. This won't change anything. We're no longer talking about the murder of an innocent man. We're talking about how you're burning police cars on the streets of Atlanta, Georgia. Go home.
I say this message is powerful because I would hear some concerns from some of my friends and even some family members of mine who would disagree with me on almost every political issue. These specific people would complain because they are constantly being told how to protest, and now they feel as if they're left with one last resort, which is to riot and destroy our communities. So I decided to suspend some biases of mine and research further into the murder of George Floyd. It wasn't enough for me to hear it through the opinion of the mainstream media, so I pulled from different sources and researched into not only the police department of Minneapolis, also known as the 5th District of Minnesota, but also the community as a whole. From what I can see, it doesn't look good. If you are currently watching this with any children underneath the age of 13, just an advisory, there is some explicit content in some of these video segments. As a matter of fact, not only is racism possibly strong within the city of Minneapolis, but it is also possible that civil rights has taken multiple steps backwards in the same district of Minnesota. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, let us reflect on the words from the mayor of Atlanta.
If you want change in America, go and register to vote. Show up at the polls on June 9th. Do it in November.
Obviously, the corruption of the police force is prevalent in the 5th District of Minnesota. Not only were there 4 officers present with George Floyd's murder, but all these 4 officers hold roughly 17 years of misconduct and abuse. To make matters even worse, Minneapolis is ranked as one of the worst places for Black Americans to live. So it would make sense to vote out the representatives of that particular district and replace them with those that would not only represent the district much better, but also cultivate good moral values and encourage that kind of community. When we do our research, we realize that the mayor of this district was only recently elected a couple of years ago by a landslide. His predecessors also hold similar political ideologies, and the same people who elected him also elected Congresswoman Representative Ilhan Omar, which tend to promote the movements such as Black Lives Matter. Regardless of this, however, poverty rate is still unfavorable towards Black Americans for the past 8 years, not only in Minneapolis, but throughout Minnesota as a whole. They also tend to be the representatives that publicly favor less brutal police tactics toward citizens. This means we need to take a further look into the law enforcement of Minneapolis as well as the community. To start off, we'll first examine the community to understand what exactly is being cultivated within the District of Minnesota. Since this is a racial issue, we're going to look at the demographics of the respective district. According to the U.S. Census, whites make up the majority of Minneapolis, with blacks or African Americans making up only a third of the percentage of whites. Now, it is important to take into consideration that there is a difference between a white European and a white Arab. It's also just as important to consider that being a Middle Eastern North African individual is not taken into account when conducting the census. When Arabs migrated to the United States in the 50s to 60s, they weren't considered Arab or Middle Eastern. They were considered white.
What do all of these Arab Americans have in common? The US government says they're white. Say what? As an Arab American myself, I wanted to look into why Arabs are considered white, why the census classification matters, and why changing it may be problematic. There are between 2 to 4 million Arabs in the US who hail from 22 different countries. But according to the box they're meant to check on the US Census and other applications, they're white. Now, let's first set aside the fact that the last time Mohammed Abdullah went through TSA security, he didn't necessarily reap any of that sweet white privilege. There's actually a history behind this categorization. It dates back to the 1880s and 1890s when Arabs first began immigrating to the US from present-day Lebanon and Syria. They settled in Boston, Detroit, and New York, establishing restaurants, businesses, and newspapers. But unlike Irish, Italian, and Portuguese immigrants, these newcomers didn't come from Europe. They came from Asia, at a time when white Americans felt that Asians would take their jobs. The Chinese Exclusion Act barred Asian immigrants from becoming citizens. In fact, up until 1952, generally only white people were eligible to become American citizens. And so Arabs went to court and fought several cases arguing they should be classified as white. And they won. Now, back then, being white came with a lot of perks, kind of like today. And so Arabs who sought white identification did so to avoid discrimination in public life and to be treated better than non-white minorities. But fast forward to today's post-9/11 America. Arabs are discriminated against regularly at airports and courts, by the government, and by the police. Many feel they're not treated as full American citizens, let alone white. So you might be asking, why does a box on the census even matter? Well, for one, having better data on the US population gives us a more complete picture of how diverse the country is becoming. And policymakers can potentially better serve the needs of their constituencies if they know more about them. The Arab American population has basically been invisible and hasn't gotten the benefits of having federal minority status. That's why during the 2010 census, activists encouraged folks to check it right, you ain't white. They argue that having actual data on the size of the community is helpful for political mobilization, tracking hate crimes, applying for federal grants for minority-owned businesses, being considered for affirmative action, and health research. In 2013, Arab American organizations and academics sent the U.S. Census Bureau a letter to include a Middle Eastern or North African category for the next census in 2020, and the government is considering that today. But it's a double-edged sword, and not every Arab American is on board. Some warn that handing the government specific numbers and data will only result in more surveillance and profiling, and there's reason to be cautious. Data from the Census Bureau was used to round up Japanese Americans in internment camps during World War II. And in the years after 9/11, the Census Bureau shared survey information with the Department of Homeland Security on the Arab community, including details on Arabs in specific zip codes. And that raised a lot of eyebrows among civil rights groups. So, in the future, Arabs may no longer have to check white. But will the positives of this development outweigh the potential dangers?
Most of these Arabs have identified as Muslim, meaning their culture would be significantly different from that of the average white American. Since Ilhan Omar was elected as the first Muslim woman in Congress, it would make sense to learn about the culture that Muslims prefer living in Minneapolis, given the fact that Arabs have been counted into consideration with the white population. Here was an interview conducted roughly 4 years ago on what kind of rule Muslims living in Minneapolis prefer.
Is it easy to be Muslim in America, or is it hard?
It's easy Muslim.
It's easy to be Muslim in
Yeah.
America. Nobody gives you problems.
No, it's no problem. This is a free country. That's the beauty of it. So we love America. I mean, it's a great country. Freedom of speech, freedom of choice of your religion.
Right.
So we don't have any issues.
Do you feel more comfortable living under American law, or do you feel more comfortable living under Sharia law?
Sharia law. I'm a Muslim. I prefer Sharia law.
Right.
Sharia law, yes.
You prefer Sharia law over American law?
Of course, yeah. Of course, yeah.
And do you find most of your friends feel the same way?
Yeah, of course, if you're Muslim, yeah.
He can make his daughter marry somebody.
Yeah, he can. Yeah, he can. He has the authority,
The authority to that.
Yeah.
What is Sharia law? Long story short, it is the implementation of Islam through the political system or an establishment of Islamic rule. Is this Islamic rule friendly towards all races? More importantly, does it help the black community? Believe it or not, there is actually one city in America that has developed a role model of Sharia law influence within its community and its law enforcement. This city is Dearborn, Michigan. Now, it is important to look at the demographics of Dearborn the same way we observe the demographics of Minneapolis, which would mean to take into account that Arabs claimed the status as white when they migrated here to the United States. I mean, it would make sense because people like Ilhan Omar, Muhammad Ali, and Malcolm X have become part of the Islamic movement. Surprisingly though, as of this year, 2020, 90% of Dearborn is white, with blacks being roughly 3%. 84 to 87% of naturalized citizens living in Dearborn originated not from Europe, but from Asia. Plus, the population as a whole has been on the decline for the past 10 years. What's going on with Dearborn? What's going on in Minneapolis? Thankfully, there was a testimony from a Christian apologist by the name of David Wood when he, along with a former Muslim, were sharing the gospel of Christ with the Dearborn community. He described that he was being detained along with his former Muslim friend Nabil Qureshi. In the beginning of his video, he starts off with describing how the police force has usurped rights from other Christians that would proclaim the gospel in the city of Dearborn. These rights include freedom of speech, freedom of exercise in religion, and freedom to call upon his or herself witnesses in their favor. They do this by arresting them and seizing their camera footage. When describing the encounter, Dr. Wood addresses the Chief of Police in Dearborn, Ronald Haddad.
Hello, Chief Haddad. My name is David Wood. You might remember me as the Christian whose constitutional rights were repeatedly violated at the Dearborn Arab Festival. Wait, I'm not being specific enough, am I? Dozens of Christians had their rights violated at the Arab Festival. All right, I'm the Christian who was arrested while standing on a public street recording a peaceful dialogue. I'm sorry, that's not clear enough either, is it? There were 3 Christians arrested while standing on a public street recording a peaceful dialogue. This was in addition to our friend Nabil, who was arrested while proclaiming his love for a group of Muslims who were insulting and threatening him. All right, I'm the 6'3" white guy who was arrested, whose camera and equipment were illegally seized, and who was thrown in jail on a false charge as punishment and retribution for resisting your attempts to establish Sharia law in Dearborn. Oh, that's clear enough. Normally, I'd rather talk to someone face to face. The problem in this case is that I don't trust you at all. People in your department, including you, have lied to us, and you have no respect for the civil rights of non-Muslims. This makes it a bit difficult to sit down with you. For all I know, you won't like something I say, and then you'll use your position as chief of police to have me tossed in yet another jail cell on yet another false charge. And since I know that if I were to bring a camera along, you'd just have your Sharia task force illegally strong-arm it from me again, I figured it would be best if I say what I need to say in a video, far, far away from the long arm of the STF. Chief Haddad, you have our 3 video cameras, as well as several of our microphones, camera bags, cables, adapters, etc. Not to mention my pocket New Testament, assuming you haven't ripped it to shreds, as you've already done with the Bill of Rights. By now, you know what's on those cameras. You know that Nabil, in the midst of sharing his faith, was walking around with a wireless handheld microphone, interviewing people who came up to him. What's that called? That's called journalism. Good. We were going to use that footage for YouTube, for our blog, and for a TV show that I do on ABN. Now, I might be inclined to give you the benefit of the doubt and say, well, maybe Chief Haddad isn't aware of the fact that it's illegal for him to seize the cameras of journalists. But I can't say that about you because 2 weeks ago, the Thomas More Law Center faxed you a letter informing you that it was illegal for you to seize our cameras. And yet you haven't responded, nor have you returned our cameras. The question is why? Why would you trample on the U.S. Constitution by refusing to give back our property? This may seem like an odd question after you unlawfully arrested us, took away our freedom of speech, illegally confiscated our property, violated our right to freedom of the press, and obliterated the free expression of our religion. In other words, since you've already violated our rights in almost every way imaginable, why would it be surprising that you're violating them further by not returning our cameras? Well, I think your refusal to respect our right to our own video footage says a lot about your motives. I'm sure you've been following the news stories about the violation of our rights. Some people are saying that we were harassing Muslims, that we were tormenting children, that we were preaching fire and brimstone, that we were trying to cause a scene, that police officers ordered us to leave, and that in a stubborn act of defiance, we refused. Now, since you've seen the footage, you know that all of this is sheer deception. I'll focus on these distortions and outright lies in a separate video, but what I'd like to ask you, Chief Haddad, is this. Why is it that people are able to continue circulating lies about our ministry when there's video footage proving that these men are lying? They're able to spread deception about us. They're able to drag our reputations through the mud because you took away our constitutionally protected video footage that we would have used to show people what really happened at the festival. So you haven't just violated our constitutional rights in half a dozen or so ways. You've also actively enabled those who hate and despise us to spread lies about us. And there's nothing we can do about these lies because you've got the truth locked up inside that impenetrable fortress of oppression and intolerance known as the Dearborn Police Department. The truth would have been circulating on news programs and YouTube videos long ago if only you hadn't decided to declare war on both Christianity and America itself. You know what's on those cameras, Chief Haddad. And you know that practically everything our critics are saying about us is patent nonsense. And so it seems that the reason you're refusing to return our cameras is that you want people to lie about us. In which case, your hatred of Christians, your contempt for our rights, and your corruption are all the more evident. Chief Haddad, I know that the footage on those cameras is going to embarrass your department when people see what really happened at our arrest. Many people are going to be exposed as liars when the world sees Nabil Qureshi peacefully sharing his beliefs with Muslims who approached him, and the rest of us calmly recording the exchange. That's not the version of events you want circulating, but that's what actually happened. You know it, and I know it. But I want America to know it. Everyone's telling me, of course, that you're not going to allow it, that you're going to erase the footage, or that the cameras are going to mysteriously disappear, just as the civil rights of Christians mysteriously disappeared the moment you became chief of police. That certainly wouldn't surprise me, given what I've seen from your department, so I don't know what to expect, but I can say that it's not going to look good, and no one's going to be fooled if you erase our footage. So if it's not too much trouble, We'd like our property back. Property which, let's face it, you've stolen from us. If possible, I'd also like the footage from the security cameras in the police department when you were booking us. I think the footage will help us expose the bias of the Dearborn PD. For instance, I've heard that when your officers forced Negin to take off her long-sleeve shirt and strip down to her tank top in front of the male police officers who were present, one of them said, "Let's get this beautiful girl into a nice cell." Then he said, "Step over here so we can get a look at you." Now I'm willing to interpret this for the moment in the most innocent manner imaginable. But I'd like to ask you this. Would your officers have treated an 18-year-old Muslim girl like that? Would they have forced her to strip down to a tank top in front of male officers, and would they have made comments about her beauty and about getting a better look at her? Of course not. They wouldn't dare. Why? Because this is Dearborn, and there are two sets of rules, one for Muslims and one for everyone else. What I'd like to see from the Dearborn Police Department is equal treatment under the law. At last year's Arab Festival, Muslim security guards physically assaulted us. They even physically assaulted our friend Mary Jo, while one of them confidently declared that, like you, he doesn't care what our rights as American citizens are. Remind me, how many of those security guards were hauled off in handcuffs? None. Right. Despite the fact that we had the attacks on camera. And yet I was arrested this year, apparently as revenge for publicizing the attacks last year. I didn't assault anyone. I didn't insult anyone. I didn't do anything wrong. Neither did Nabil or Paul or Negin. Why the double standards, Chief? How come a Muslim won't get arrested for physically assaulting a Christian woman, but a Christian woman will go to jail for holding a camera on a public street? The reason, Chief Haddad, is you. As far as I'm concerned, if you're going to use your position and authority to persecute, oppress, and subjugate members of any religion, you don't qualify for mall security, let alone chief of police. And so I hope that for once you'll do the right thing. I invite you to return the cameras that you illegally seized. I also invite you to take full responsibility for your department's oppression of Christians and to resign from your position as chief of police. Not only because of your complete disregard for the constitutional rights of non-Muslims, but also because you have no concern for the reputations of the officers under you. You send them out to persecute Christians, and some of them don't want to persecute Christians. How do I know? Some of them told us. And yet they have to follow your orders. But when I put up a video showing them harassing Christians for handing out Bibles or arresting people for having a peaceful discussion, they're the ones who look bad. All because they're taking orders from you. So you're throwing your fellow officers under the bus, and you don't seem to care as long as you get to continue your campaign of reducing Christians to dhimmi status. Your officers also know that you refuse to give back our stolen property because you're trying to avoid the consequences of your illegal activities. They know you're corrupt, and I have no clue how you can hold your head high among them. You have no business being a role model for other police officers, Chief. Well, not in America. I think you'd fit right in at a police station in, say, Iran, which seems to be the template for your work in Dearborn.
Later on, the cameras were returned to him, to which the footage taken reveal not just the unlawful arrest of Nabil Qureshi and David Wood, but the surrounding community cheering their arrest.
Okay. But I think that's something that kept going with the video afterwards. We want to make this perfectly clear. We don't have any issue with people there. We have no issue with people at police. We don't have issue with people at police. So I
didn't see that video. The video just saying Islamic people as a community are just all bad. And they're all asking for trouble. They're all asking for trouble.
I love them. I have no problem with it.
Why decide to make all these videos?
That's a good question. We came here yesterday, or last year, and we saw a pamphlet that we had a question about. So we went to the booth.
Year in a row.
I just happened to be here.
If last year went bad, why are you here again? Why are you
here to see if it's going better this year. We want to see if it's better this year than it was last year.
Are you sure about that?
I'm pretty sure it's all the way around.
I think you're looking for more trouble.
We're not looking for trouble. We want to see if things are better. Generally, things have been better. Security hasn't been hitting us. Security hasn't been assaulting us. So things aren't claimed to be just a problem. He said he was here to receive worship. He did receive worship. He forgave people's sins. He miraculously healed people that died
What makes Jesus better than Allah?
Okay, I got a bunch of you guys who are asking questions. So did like 4 of these guys.
You're saying a man?
That's an excellent question.
What's up, buddy?
Well, people are worshiping Jesus as God less than a decade after. Hey, that's troublemaker. I'm just good guy. So in the Old Testament, we see a prophecy saying that a child will be born to you and he will be the mighty God. In the Old Testament, it actually says the mighty God will be born as a child to you. In actuality, it can't just be like a half God. It actually says the everlasting Father, Abiyad, will be born to you. So this is a prophecy we knew would happen. That's an excellent question. What we find in the New Testament is that in order, he doesn't have to do any of this.
Have you met Jesus yourself?
Say again? These are great questions, guys. I'm loving this. Anyone else have a question? Yeah.
This is a police investigation.
Well, in the Bible, when people... I'll give you $100. You're going to jail.
Slightly superior assignment to
Bibles, but there's only one.
You need to place your hands behind your back. Place your hands behind your back.
Man, I love people. Okay, so there's all kinds of religions. No big deal. I don't mind. Ya somebody said last time it's mine. Hold on to my arm. Hold on to my shirt.
I'll leave a link of the video in the description box. For now, let's get back to the so what of the issue at hand. What does this have to do with racism against George Floyd? Sad to say, the Muslim community seems to alienate the black community, even when attending prayer at a local mosque. The Islamic community tends to alienate black Muslims.
To explain Islam to people. I'm tired of having to explain why Black Lives Matter to people. I'm not gonna sit here and be like, Muslims don't kill people, we're nice, like, because I've been doing that my whole life and I still get the same BS.
Muslims in America are diverse, but Black Muslims are largely left out of the conversation.
Black kids do not believe me when I say I'm black. And at the mosque, when it's time to pray, sisters slide their feet away from mine. At the mosque, when it's time to pray, sisters slide their feet away from mine. At the mosque, when it's time to pray, sisters slide their feet away from mine.
It's estimated that Black Muslims make up as much as a third of all Muslims in the US, and about 40% of American-born Muslims are Black, more than any other race. The Muslim population in the US overall is pretty small, but growing.
Get a lot of people that are kind of so ingrained in their culture that and their biases that interacting with Black Muslims is like something they don't usually do. Interacting with Black Muslims is like something they don't usually do.
We're for democracy and everyone here is equal and you're free to do whatever you want, but that's not necessarily the case.
Even many American-based Muslim advocacy groups inadvertently focus on immigrants and Arab Muslims living in the US.
Black Muslims that I've spoken to have felt like Muslims of other races don't want to engage. Muslims of other races don't want to engage with Black Muslims. So I would say we have a lot to work on in terms of race and getting over cultural boundaries.
When it comes to identity, almost half of American Muslims see themselves as Muslim first, American second. That's pretty common for other religious groups in the US.
Not only being a Muslim, not only being a Muslim American, being Somali, being Black, being young. There's a lot of identities that you have to reconcile.
Although Islam and being African American are very big parts of my identity. I think people need to stop and realize that that's not all that there is to me. People get so hung up on what they think they know, that they fail to see the whole person. And honestly, that's probably the biggest thing that's like a loss on both sides.
In another video from David Wood, he describes how Muslims tend to act towards those who are black. It's not pretty.
Adam Sulla likes to call people racists. When passengers got sick of his friend Slim screaming Om Telelet Om on a plane recently and Delta forced them to leave, he called people racists.
You guys are racist. You guys are racist. You guys are racist.
As we go through Adam's videos, we see that he runs into lots of racists. Talking with most racist YouTuber. Most racist YouTuber disrespects the Quran. Reading racist comments with my family. Racist man on a plane, day before 9/11. Racist guy tells me to go back to my country. Racist guy puts Arab clothes on. Racist man harasses my friend. Our racist stories as Muslim teens. What I find ironic about these unceasing charges of racism is that Adam Sulla is a racist. Racist Adam once posted a video titled, "Things Arab Parents Say to Their Kids." What kinds of things do Arab mothers say to their kids? Let's find out from Racist Adam, who's dressed up like an Arab woman.
هذا الآن آدم تعال آدم تعال.
The Abid are outside, they're gonna come get you. The Abid are outside, they're gonna come get you. The Abid are outside, they're gonna come get you.
Now, if you know even a little Arabic, you just saw something really, really bad. Racist Adam's stereotype of an Arab mother says, the Abid are outside, they're gonna come get you. And Racist Adam translates Abid as gangsters. Why is this really, really bad? Well, the word abd in Arabic means slave. The plural of abd is abid. So the literal translation of abid is slaves. Why would Racist Adam's character say, the slaves are outside? And why would Racist Adam translate this as, the gangsters are outside? He translates it as gangsters because he's racist. Let me explain. Muhammad, Prophet of Islam, bought, owned, sold, and traded black African slaves. Sahih al-Bukhari, 7263. Allah's messenger was staying in a mashraba, and a black slave of Allah's messenger was at the top of its stairs. Sahih al-Bukhari, 6161. Allah's messenger was on a journey, and he had a black slave called Anjasha. Sunan an-Nasai, 3858. Then a man from Banu ad-Dubayb, who was called Rifa bin Zayd, gave the messenger of Allah a black slave who was called Middam. Muhammad's followers went on to institutionalize black African slavery 1,000 years before the United States even existed. And because they enslaved so many black Africans, Arab Muslims began using the term abd as a derogatory term for black people. They would refer to black people in general as abid, slaves. To this day, there are countless Arab Muslims who refer to blacks as abid, and there's been a social media campaign calling on racist Arabs like Racist Adam to stop using the word. In an article titled, "Arab Americans Take to Social Media to End A-Word Racial Slur Against Blacks," Deadline Detroit reports, a new Muslim American group, co-founded by Metro Detroiters, is launching a social media campaign today to urge Arabs to stop using Arabic racial slurs against African Americans, Niraj Waraku reports in the Free Press. Called Drop the A-Word, the campaign asks Arab Americans to stop using the words abd and its plural, abid, Arabic words that they sometimes use as slurs against black people in the way some might use the N-word. The group asks participants to use the hashtag, which allows Twitter users to read responses, drop the A-word. According to Daoud Walid, who's an African-American Muslim and the executive director of the Michigan chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations, abd is a term that at one time had a general meaning of slave, then became a specific term referring to blacks who were viewed as subservient. When racist Adam's character says the Abid are outside, they're gonna come get you, it wouldn't make sense to translate this as the slaves are outside, they're gonna come get you. So he can only be using this to mean the blacks are outside, they're gonna come get you. Now, someone could defend racist Adam here and claim that it's only the character who's calling black people slaves, in the same way a character in a movie might use a derogatory term. So this wouldn't mean that Adam is a racist, it's only the character who's a racist. The problem with this response is that the character isn't the one who's doing the subtitles. Racist Adam is doing the subtitles, and he translates the word Abid, which here means blacks, as gangsters. So according to racist Adam Saleh, the term Abid, which literally means slaves, but in this context means blacks, should be translated as gangsters. In the racist mind of racist Adam Saleh, black people are gangsters. But we can go further. When racist Adam gets angry, he likes to call African Americans the English equivalent of Abid. One day, racist Adam's friend pranked him by having a young black man come up to him and tell him how awful his videos are. Racist Adam reacts by threatening to kill the young man and then shoving him.
I bet I call the cops. Say one more thing, son.
I've noticed that when racist Adam knows he's being filmed, he's extremely nice.
I love you.
But he's a very different person when he doesn't know he's being filmed. Watch how many N-bombs he drops.
Say one more thing. Say one more thing, nigga. Say one more thing, nigga. Say one more thing, son.
So, racist Adam Saleh calls African Americans slaves, gangsters, and niggers. And his followers absolutely love it. Why is this attitude towards blacks tolerated in the Arab Muslim community? It's tolerated because the supreme pattern of conduct in the Arab Muslim community is Muhammad, a man who bought, owned, sold, and traded black African slaves, a man who referred to Ethiopians as raisin heads, a man who claimed that Satan looks like a black man. If you'd like to understand the roots of racist Adam's bigotry, click on this video and see what Islam's most trusted sources have to say about racist Muhammad's view of Africans. Oh, and by the way, be sure to go through the comments section of relevant videos and articles and share this video and this video with Adam's followers whenever they call someone a racist, which is pretty much whenever anyone disagrees with them about anything.
The video that David Wood is talking about, I will leave in the description box as well. Before I go any further, I've known plenty of Arabs and Muslims that are friendly towards other people of different demographics and beliefs. Now, provided the characteristics of a Sharia law society and what effects it has on the community and law enforcement, it is quite a coincidence that A, the culture of Minneapolis seems to favor a Sharia law society. B, the city of Minneapolis is ranked as one of the worst cities for black Americans to live in. C, law enforcement officers were able to get away with a long history of misconduct. This could also be the case with Dearborn. And D, the business that reported George Floyd was ran by an Arab family.
Well, the owner of the South Minneapolis convenience store where police first made contact with George Floyd is speaking out.
He says that officers were called because of a counterfeit $20 bill that Floyd used to buy a pack of cigarettes. Only on WCCO, Mahmoud Abamayali says that he is with the community and wanting justice for the Floyd family. Here's Reg Chapman.
For 31 years, Cup Foods has been a part of the South Minneapolis community.
We don't just work in that community. That is our community. We know the community. It's a vibe that is unmatched to any other community. It's the best thing that's happened to our family.
The family-owned business has come under fire after a phone call to police about the passing of a counterfeit $20 bill led to 46-year-old George Floyd begging a Minneapolis police officer for his life.
I was not there.
You were not there.
The staff that called the police followed protocol. When he identified the bill was fake, the patron was out of the establishment. When the police arrived, he was outside of the establishment, which normally never takes place. Why he was still there, we're not sure.
Owner Micah Bumniali says what happened on the street outside his establishment should never have ended with a man dying.
Most of the time when patrons give us a counterfeit bill, they don't even know it's fake. So when the police are called, there's no crime being committed. They just want to know where they got it from. And that's usually what takes place. This was a very circumstantial event that ended in a tragedy, and unfortunately, we're taking a lot of animosity for it.
He understands people are upset, but feels their anger should be used to get the arrest and conviction of those responsible for Floyd's death.
For those who say if the police hadn't been called, he wouldn't be alive. How does that staff member feel about that?
That may be rightfully so. However, we cannot predict the future. If I was there, things would have been handled differently.
This business owner says he is prepared to do what he can for the family.
We want to offer, first and foremost, our deepest condolences, and we want to give any support, if it's financially, socially, spiritually, any type of support they need.
Reg Chapman, WCCO 4 News.
Cup food owners say that video from the store, which they've been asked not to release, shows that Floyd was not resisting officers. They have offered to pay for Floyd's funeral expenses.
More importantly, it's quite a coincidence that after this event occurs, when conducting a Google search for the relations between the Arab and Black communities in Minneapolis, an article that describes the tensions between the Arab and Black communities regarding George Floyd pops up as the first result. To go even further, in this exact same article, it's mentioned that Arab communities are possibly still using the term Abid to describe African Americans. If that's not enough to make you shudder, following this statement, Hadam Abudayi, the executive director of the Chicago-based Arab American Action Network, he states to store owners that they, quote, should put money back into the communities from which they profit. I don't know about you, but this sounds like a subliminal message to the Arab community to not discriminate customers and future employees based on their race. This can explain the amount of death threats the family has received for reporting the use of counterfeit money to law enforcement. At this point, I'm a bit surprised we haven't provided enough attention to what led up to the event, and we're asking officers who genuinely can't rub two brain cells together to even carry themselves as peace officers, let alone be competent enough to hold decent moral values. Now, someone can bring these objections to my thesis. Objection number 1. Since Ilhan Omar, the representative from Minneapolis, is Black, a Muslim, and a woman, wouldn't she be easily discriminated against using your logic and reasoning? In other words, since Congress representatives are voted via the majority of the people, why would someone who is racist, sexist, or a bigot vote for someone who is of different color, different sex, and different religion? Two factors contribute to the election of a candidate, even if the majority of the district is opposed to the candidate they're voting for. Factor number 1 is that if the district or county dislikes a candidate, they're probably not going to show to the polls which gives the other candidate and their base a significant advantage. This leads us to factor number 2. Factor number 2 is that when someone decides to vote for a particular candidate that they don't like, it's likely that they're not voting for any one candidate, but rather against another. Objection number 2. The white to black ratio is not clearly as great in Minneapolis as it is in Dearborn. What makes you think this is still a racial issue? This is what I was able to find in the comment section of David Wood's video on Adam Saleh. I figured I would let former Muslims speak for me regarding the use of the derogatory term towards Black Americans. Objection number 3. What makes you think that the Arab business that reported the use of a counterfeit bill is just like Adam Sulla? What reasonable suspicions do you have to believe that this same Arab business was racist towards George Floyd? I don't. It's possible the business was in the right. It's just as possible it was in the wrong. We don't have enough evidence to suspect ill intent of the Arab-run business. The racial issue I'm bringing up would be George Floyd's difficulties in finding a job in Minneapolis. Floyd lost his job as a bouncer for the El Nuevo Rodeo for 17 years before Minnesota's governor issued the stay-at-home order. This would mean that Floyd would have to look for another job, being a convicted felon, living in an area to where, quote, there are horror stories about how people in the black community are treated by the Arab business owners and by the security they hire. That's a bit difficult to do. Now, I'm not justifying the use of counterfeit currency, but he was probably running out of money and became desperate. That could also explain the use of drugs, which, again, I am not endorsing the use of drugs in this matter. I'm not condoning that behavior, but when you get desperate and when you get stressed out, you turn to other vices, and you know what? Honestly, I can't help but somewhat feel bad for the guy. I mean, he was indeed a father trying to take care of his daughter. That's a lot of stress to put on a person who just lost his job and can't find a job. It is. Now, back to the relations between Black Americans and Arab Americans. And I'm going to break it down Barney style for people who can't walk and chew gum at the same time. Is calling black people a bead racist? Yes, it is. Is discriminating any people from employment because of any color of their skin racist? Yes, it is. Should we be sending Arab businesses death threats discriminating against Muslims, riot, loot, and murder Arabs because of the actions of a few? No. Only a racist would do that. I've even condemned the racism and bigotry against Muslims living in China who have become systematically oppressed, spied, and experimented on by the CCP government when no one else would say a word. If you disagree with me in this matter, you are no better than the Chinese government that oppresses the Uyghurs by seizing their children and placing them into re-education camps to have them brainwashed into submitting to the brutal CCP regime. Or better yet, you're no better than Antifa, the Nazi Socialist Party, ISIS, the Communist Party, or the KKK. So what would be the solution? It's not going to be the implementation of Islam, regardless of Malcolm X's membership with the Nation of Islam. What's Black Lives Matter approach to the issue? Thank you for watching this video segment. To watch the full-length video with this segment, where I touch up on various other topics surrounding this issue, please click the link down in the description box below.